Alright, so here's the beginning of video number 2 to finish up the slides. We're on slide 29, and we just have to make it to 41. So let's go over it. This is the beginning of the conversation of the idea that atoms bond together, or the idea that atoms are attracted to one another. Going through these past simulations, this one about atomic interactions, which you should have gone to check it out, and this idea of the static attractions, this idea that there's invisible charges that draw things together, we need to really start connecting those ideas to the fact that atoms like to do the same thing. Atoms form connections to one another. In fact, that's what chemical bonding is. It says the joining of atoms to form new substances. All non-living or abiotic factors and all biotic factors or living things, organisms, are based on atoms bonding in a certain way, making different types of compounds, molecules or ionic bonds, ionic compounds, words that you may recall from 8th grade science. Anyhow, this video will help kind of reinforce some of those ideas. You only have to watch the first minute and a half of it. And in general, we don't have to have a high school chemistry understanding to kind of proceed with this idea. The important thing is just to remember that organisms are consuming compounds or substances where atoms are bonded together of all different elements combined in structures and shapes. You can see right here, this looks like Mickey Mouse, and this one has a different structure. And the central atom here is bonded to 3 outer ones. Meanwhile, here you have a center one bonded to 2. The task here is to use the word electron, the word nucleus, and the word chemical bonding to answer these questions. So number 1, it says the oxygen atom's blank. So what about this oxygen atom is attracted to the, what of the oxygen atom is attracted to what of the hydrogen atom? So what does the oxygen atom have that the hydrogen wants? What does the hydrogen have that the oxygen wants? And you fill in the blank. So you pick electron, nucleus, or chemical bonding for each of those. And then when the attraction forms, or it says the attraction forms a blank. So which one of these words do you want to put in the blank here, right? And then it says what's happening in scenario B. So you use these words of electron, nucleus, and chemical bonding just to describe this reaction here. So scenario B is this right here, where you have some hydrogen molecules, you have some nitrogen molecules, and how would you describe this right here? All right, so next slide. All right, the next slide is just a way of reviewing how different scientists will draw a molecule. So when you have a structure of different atoms bonded together, there's different ways to do it. These are called models because a model is any way to represent something. In this situation, it's a model to represent the structure of certain molecule, and a molecule specifically of sugar. So these are different ways to model what sugar is. This slide is just for a review, just so you can see. Some people draw the structure of the molecule to show 3-dimensional space, and some draw it just to show you what atoms are involved. So sugar, you can see, is just carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but they bond in specific ways. And this is one of the main ways that our whole body operates, and it's the primary, or one of the single molecules on the planet that we use to create energy in our bodies. So somehow we're taking these structures, these molecules, or these atoms bonded together in a special way to make energy in our bodies. All right, so thinking about our own self, we are really just truly a collection of different chemically bonded atoms. As you study the body and you go from organs like the digestive system to the stomach, you keep zooming in, you get to the cells, but eventually we really are in general, just a collection, or a very special, specific collection of bonded atoms. Here it says that a single cell is made up of 100 trillion atoms. So we have trillions and trillions and trillions of cells in our body, and each one of those cells contains hundreds of trillions of atoms. So atoms are pretty small, and it takes a lot to make a human being. Here's a TED Talk link that would be fantastic, and it just shows you some of the molecules in the body and what they do, specifically these things called motor proteins. So you have molecules or non-living structures in your body, a specific type of molecule called a protein, and these things can do Very interesting stuff. You should look at it. It's very interesting. All right, in this situation here, let me just adjust the view. Here we go. So making or breaking chemical bonds. The idea is the body can build molecules from individual atoms, or it can break large molecular structures down to smaller molecules or individual atoms. Our bodies can do this. They can create chemical reactions that connect or build bonds or break them down. The idea is that you look at you have the choice of answering this one here or this one here, but not both. Don't worry about both. And in your explanation, you need to use the word chemical bonding and the idea of electrons. So we're trying to connect this idea that chemical bonds require an attraction to electrons of each atom. So each atom has electrons. Each atom is drawn to those because their nucleus is positive, and positive and negative attract, right? So this idea of building larger molecules in the body has to do with, or this one is building. So in this example too, you're building a structure. So the atoms involved must have some kind of attraction going on between the nucleus of each atom and their electrons. In this example, you're breaking it down. In fact, this situation is in example B. Image B has someone eating really large, complex molecules called carbohydrates, but they're broken down into smaller parts. What's happening to the chemical bonds to make smaller molecules? What do you think is happening with the electrons in that situation? You just try your best to connect the idea of chemical attraction and electrons. In question 2, if you choose to answer it, you have A and C options. You can look at option A or option C here. Option C is a person working out, and when you work out, you build your muscle cells increase in size. They're increasing in size because you're building larger protein structures in each cell. So the idea again would be trying to write about that process using the ideas of chemical bonding and the attraction atoms have to get more electrons. So in atoms' effort to get more electrons, they're potentially forming more or less bonds, depending on your situation. All right, good luck. You're just trying your best to relate this idea of chemical bonding to what it means for the body. Building larger structures like muscles, digesting food. And in example A, you have a single cell, but cells reproduce by dividing. In order to divide, they have to increase or duplicate every single molecule that makes them. Every DNA part, every part of their cell membrane, every organ they have inside, including the nucleus. They have to recreate all their structures. They have to duplicate them. If they have to duplicate them, they have to build these structures. So they build basically large molecular structures that make up itself, but they have to make enough of them so that they divide, each one gets the right amount of molecules. So a lot of building of molecules in example A. All right. Here we have cycling of elements throughout the environment. And ones specifically that are most important to biology are often the nitrogen cycle, phosphorus element, carbon, and sulfur cycling throughout the environment. We've studied carbon cycling throughout the environment. In fact, we've also studied that when carbon cycles through the environment, if it gets into water the wrong way, or when carbon's used as a fossil fuel, it potentially creates acid rain, or it can create a pH problem. So we know when carbon moves around in the environment, it can either be associated with climate change by excess carbon dioxide in the air, or we know it can, if carbon in the right form gets into water, it can create an acidic environment or a change in pH that causes issue. Well, we haven't studied some of these other elements, but they all cycle between living and non-living things. The question is how old do you think the carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur atoms are that make up your body? So that's just a fun hypothesis. You just come up with an idea. This lower part is predict 5 places the carbon of your body could have been before it ended up as part of your body. So where do you think, so carbon, we know it cycles between living and non-living parts of the environment. Where do you think it could have been? In other life forms? Non-living things? Guess. So you just come up with a list of what you think. These links right here, the first one deals with the carbon cycle. The second one covers, I believe, one of these other elements and how it cycles through the environment. I would encourage you to check it out. Here, this idea of eating is important, right? And when we consume food, we're really taking in carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. these 4 primary elements. And in your body, they're used to make all these more complex chemically bonded molecules and structures that make up the small kind of molecular basis of your life. So the only way that we can get the atoms we need to build our cells or build other structures in the body is to consume food. And the food we eat gives us those building blocks like little Legos. Here we have a new word. So it's a word that we use to describe large molecules. Large molecules are called polymers. And polymers are large molecules formed by smaller molecules that have bonded together. So if you could bond a lot of smaller molecules together, it forms kind of a general structure. These are examples. Here's a really long visual chain of a lot of smaller molecules bonding together. This thing called an enzyme, you can see how many atoms are involved. Every little colored dot is a different atom. They bond in a specific structure, a repeating pattern, and this repeating structure is, in our bodies, generally contains carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, different elements. And they all have special functions in our body. And we'll learn more about different types of polymers later. But it's important to remember this word and write it down in our definitions. Here it says, hypothesize how animals get all the atoms they need to build these huge polymers. Well, we just talked about that a couple minutes ago. So if you want to rewind the video and listen, you have yourself your answer. But again, with a hypothesis, it's just your best effort to explain what you think. It's a way for you to show your thinking to me. So share something. Here it says, watch video and recognize 2 different polymers. So we have this video. It says, started at 9:40, skip this cholesterol thing, and go to protein at 10:45. So started at 9:45. When it hits cholesterol, just skip the video at 10:45 and use it to explain the function of 2 different polymers that the video discusses. All right. All right. We have another link here that you potentially could use. Right here, you copy down this as some notes. And carbohydrates are number 1, proteins are 2. You don't have to draw these, but it does reference what each one looks like in general, like ways that we can recognize it in life. And each of these molecules contains some amount of carbon. So carbon's found in carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. You can see here lipids are fats. Proteins are, when we think protein, we think muscle. It's just because muscle cells of any organism contains protein molecules or protein polymers. Remember, polymers, these are all examples of different polymers because they're all large molecular structures that have a bunch of smaller molecules that bonded together to make a chain. You can see DNA has this really complex, long structure. It's like a strand made up of smaller individual molecules. Here is a specific polymer we need to study a lot, and this is going to be very important in the future, and this is protein. And you can see the elements that make protein, so we want to copy this definition down. The smaller molecules that bond or form a chain are called amino acids. So this is a single amino acid right here, but when you have enough of them bond together, you call it a protein. And proteins have many, many functions in the body. Here are some highlighted for you in your definition. Your goal is to look at each one of these letters and decide which of these functions it's talking about. So for C, here, it's talking about hair. So hair is a protein. Hair is made of protein, or these long repeating amino acid chains, right? And is hair important for movement, food, chemical reactions, or a structure for the cell or body? Which one of those? So which number so you would write C equals and then pick one of these numbers. Continue that for D, E, B, and A. Pick the right function for the right protein. All right, we can skip that slide. Here we go. This slide will likely be done in class, and we'll work together as a group. But you click on this link, you follow it, and you need to write some observations. You need to come up with a scientific problem. I would encourage you to type, what is glycogen? Or, here we go. What is the function of this protein called glycogen phosphorylase? There you go. And as we practice, you write some observations. You can come up with a hypothesis. This link takes you to the website. And then finally, you come up with a conclusion. summarizing your observations, your evidence, and supporting or rejecting your hypothesis.